The ActionTruck JK conversion will transform your JK and give it the utility of a pickup, but the 300-pound reduction in vehicle weight will give your Jeep a much lighter and tighter feel. Now, although this conversion is the least intrusive conversion kit on the market, it should only be undertaken by qualified individuals. Also, be careful when you're removing the kit from the shipping crate to prevent scratches and damage to the components. Let's start with removing the rear doors. Remove the B-pillar access panel and disconnect that wiring harness and limit strap. Using a T50 torque, remove the hinge bolts and lift off the door. Use a 13mm socket and remove the hinge bracket from the Jeep. Also remove the door striker using a 40 Torx. Now 4 of the bracket bolts will be reused. Remove the hardtop by removing the 6 bolts at the tub. Next, pop off the freedom tops to access those 2 bolts on the top. Be sure to disconnect the rear wiper harness, and good luck with that. Let's remove the rear seat. There are 11 bolts mounting that seat. Use an 18mm socket and start with the seat back and the tray table in the upright position. Remove the 4 floor bolts at the front of the seat. Next, lift the seat and access the remaining bolts. There'll be one on each side as well as the center seatbelt bolt. Next, remove the 15mm nut that holds the seatbelt latch in place. Remove the 13mm nut that joins the 2 seat halves. This will make it possible to remove the rear seat in 2 halves. Remove the final 18mm under seat bracket bolt and lay the seat down. Remove the last 18mm bolt holding the seat in place and lift it out. With the remaining seat laid down, remove the rest of the 18mm bracket bolts in the seat half as well as the seat belt harness nut. Remove the seat. Remove the rear seatbelt plastic covers. Now we're using a 2014 J case, so your covers may vary. Start with the top trim piece. It will pop straight up, making it possible to separate the seatbelt retractor covers. This will gain access to the 10mm nut that holds the lower trim panel. Use a T30 Torx and remove the 2 bolts in the floor that hold the trim panel. Now those of you with a subwoofer will need to remove it, as well as to reroute the wiring forward for future subwoofer reinstallation. Use a 10mm socket and remove the tailgate guide, and a T40 Torx to remove the striker. Remove both seat belts by removing the lower T50 seatbelt bolts. To gain access to the upper seatbelt bolts, pop off the plastic trim and remove the remaining seatbelt bolts. Remove the 4 rear cargo and carpet hold-down bolts using a T30 Torx and lift out the carpet as well as the tool compartment plastic liner. The floor panel spring latch can be removed by accessing the bottom of the latch after the bumper has been removed and while lying in the dirt trying to, or just break it out. You won't be reusing it anyway, and at this stage of the install, breaking something might be refreshing. Remove the floor jack and tools and pull the drain plugs. We wanted to leave as much carpet under the truck bed as possible for noise and cargo padding, so we trimmed the lower edge of the carpet to allow for the truck bed to sit into place. It can be completely removed if you would like. Remove the soundbar bolts using a 10mm socket. The light and speaker harness has a disconnect on the passenger side. We'll modify and reuse it later. Unzip the roll bar padding and remove it in preparation for sport bar removal. There's a cargo light snapped into the cross brace and it will simply pop out. Remove all 6 harness retainers from the sport bar and disconnect the cargo light. Pop off the sport bar padding. The Sirius radio antenna is held in place with a 10mm specialty nut. Snap out the antenna and unplug the harness. The connector is tucked down into the B-pillar padding a bit, but it's accessible. Pull the antenna loose from the cage. For this next step, we used a piece of the packing crate as a straight edge and marked the brace before cutting. Yeah, that should give you some idea of how critical this step is. The idea is to remove and cut the sport bar brace just so that it's parallel, but just short of being even with the cross member. It's not a critical cut, we just don't want the brace extending past the cross member. If you have a satellite radio antenna, we can retain the original antenna mount by modifying how we trim the bracket. Mark the bracket and cut around the 2 antenna mounting holes, just leaving enough bracket to support the antenna module. Now if you don't want to deal with the whole bracket cutting thing, just tuck the module up inside the cover. It'll hold it just fine. Now if you choose to modify your corner bracket, again it's not all that critical. It will be completely concealed. Just leave a 1" by 2" tab where the original holes were located. We will use them later for reinstallation of the antenna. Go ahead and lift the carpet just to save yourself some cleanup. We measured from the back side of the sport bar cross member 68mm, or about 2 11/16 inches. Now trying to find a good consistent surface to measure from was kind of tricky. We wrapped the bar in tape to give us a good straight edge to cut after we'd marked it. But after measuring and cutting both sides, we made you a template that will take all the guesswork out of measuring. Simply line up the indexing hole on the top of the sport bar. Put a small piece of tape on each end of the template to hold it in place. Position the template with the indexing hole to the rear and the template facing forward, and wrap it around the bar. Now there is some adjustment if you totally botch it, but just be careful and make a square cut. To measure for the rear cuts, simply lay a straight edge. Now we used the straightest brace that we had from our packing crates, from one side of the hardtop mounting surface to the other. Now the goal here is to cut the bar so that the top of the remaining section of the bar is just even with the edge of the hardtop mounting surface. Mark, tape, cut, and remove the rear sport bar assembly. When we finished making the cuts on the upper part of the cage, we just wrapped both ends in tape. That way when we make the cuts at the rear, the cage won't fall over. When cutting the sport cage, there can be some binding of the blade. Have a close personal friend help reduce the bind by prying open the cut slightly with a screwdriver or similar tool. With all the cuts made, we're ready to lift out the bar. Clean up the surface of the cut with a grinder. Test fit the rear sport bar mounting caps onto all 4 sport bar mounts. You'll probably need to grind a little to get a smooth fit. Now caution, they are tough to get back off if you pound them on while test fitting. Use some spray lube if necessary. They should go on relatively easy. With the sport bar caps in place and the slotted holes lined up with the existing through hole in the bar mount, you should be able to double check your accuracy by once again using your calibrated slat from the shipping crate and placing it across the rear of the Jeep from one side to the other. The edge of our straight edge should just meet and rest on the step-down flat surface, not the raised centerpiece of our sport bar cap. Just remember, when positioning the straight edge on the tub, there will be weather strip on the bedside. Final fit the rear caps onto the sport bar mount and install the through bolt and tighten. Now you may find that the cap tends to work its way up as you tighten, so just tap it down into place while protecting the threads. It needs to be seated and tight. When we bolt on the new sport bar brace, we don't want the surface of the tub to be pulled down to meet the newly installed sport bar cap. It would be unattractive. Bottom line, we don't want the mounting point for the cage to be very far off because of the way it would pull or push on the new fiberglass bed. The front sport bar caps are pre-welded into the H-shaped sport bar frame. Test fit the frame by sliding it into place. The caps should slide easily into position. Grab the sport bar braces and do a quick test fit. Just snug up the front mounting bolt and make sure that the rear mounting bolt can be easily started. The front roll bar mounts will need to be cross-drilled using the provided aluminum guide sleeve. With the bolt tight at the front of the sports bar and just snug at the rear, tap the bar forward until the caps seat up against the sports cage. When you're certain that everything is in position, tighten up that rear bolt. It'll just hold the bar into place. Test fit both sides and you're ready to drill the cross holes through the front of the sport bar. Use a 3/16 drill along with the provided aluminum guide sleeve and drill a small pilot hole. Position the guide in the center of the adjusting slot. Drill pilot holes on both sides of the sport cage cap. This will need to be done on both the driver's as well as the passenger side. This will help with the final drilling and provide a guide hole for the larger 7/16 drill. Now again, drill from each side for better alignment. After drilling the final hole, the drill should pass through the sport bar, making it easy to install the sport bar retaining bolts. Install the bolt from the outside of the sports bar in. Loctite and tighten the through bolts. Measure from the edge of the tub to the outside wall of the H-bar. The idea here is to position the legs of the cage so that they're equally positioned in relationship to the sides of the Jeep. Grab the sports bar sandwich plates and hardware. With the floor flange in position and flat against the floor, drill 1/2-inch holes using the flange as a guide. Use Loctite and just start a bolt in the underfloor sandwich plate. Tighten after both bolts have been started. Let's move to the passenger side and repeat the process. Warning, caution, all that stuff. There's a gas tank directly under the passenger side mount, as well as some brake lines and a nice wiring harness. Take precautionary steps. We highly recommend a drill stop on the bit. The floor is soft and it'll grab that drill. Remove the sport bar braces in preparation for side panel installation. Wipe down the floor of the Jeep and use some duct tape to block the holes in the floor. We chose to keep the carpet, so we did a little trimming just to make it fit around the sport bar support legs. Now remove the corner door gasket from the tub. We'll use the existing bolt holes from the door hinges and door latch to mount the doors. Fit both doors by loosely installing the original hardware. Use some Loctite. Check for alignment by laying a straight edge along the top of the tub and lifting the door up to meet the straight edge. We want to have a good seal between the panel and the tub. Check for door gaps and make sure that the panel is pushed flush with the exterior of the Jeep. With the door properly positioned, final tighten the bolts. Repeat the process on the other side. Remove the tailgate gasket. We'll need to trim it and reinstall it later. Use a good oil-free cleaner and wipe down the bed rails as well as the bed before installing weather strip. When installing the weather strip, don't pull on it too much. You want to just lay it down so it sticks and seals tightly. Extra weather strip is included for those that will be removing the factory installed weather strip in preparation for paint. The weather stripping should be installed on the outside of the hardtop bolt holes. When installing the gasket in the bed, position the seal with the lip facing toward the rear. We're simply trying to give the bed of the Jeep a barrier against any moisture or dirt that may find its way in. On lighter model Jeeps, you'll need to grab a T30 and just remove that door detent assembly. Block the hole with some duct tape. Now's a good time to paint that striker plate surface, just to match the bed. With all the bed-to-tub seals in place and all the wiring tucked away, also remember to run your subwoofer wiring under the carpet and toward the front if you do want to reuse it. We're ready to install the tub. When installing the fiberglass tub, the tub will drop in with the forward part of the tub high. The rear sides of the tub need to be squeezed together slightly just to allow the tub to drop into place. Once the back is dropped into place, carefully lower the front and align the two studs in the floor of the bed with the holes in the tub. With all the holes lined up, you can install the bed rail bolts and the floor nuts. Grab the roll bar padding that was removed and just spread it out on the floor. We're going to separate the seams so that the entire rear section of the padding is removed. Use the factory seam as a guide and just kind of pull it and separate the two sections. This will require cutting through the zippers, but the edge that is separated will be tucked away so it won't be visible. You will have to restart the zipper onto the cover, which is a bit of a pain, but it is doable. Install the Sirius antenna and connect its harness. Orient the cover so that the form section of the cover surrounds the roll bar padding from the bottom. The rest of the install is pretty much a work it around until it looks and fits best. Tuck in any of the loose edges. Let's move to our soundbar modifications. Remove the speakers from the soundbar and disconnect. Use some tape and lay out all the cuts before beginning. The soundbar needs to be modified so that the speakers are no longer part of the soundbar. Now, we laid out all the necessary cuts with some masking tape. Probably the easiest thing to do will be to reference those images and apply your tape in a similar manner. The goal here is to gain some clearance between the soundbar and the new top. We're simply trimming off excess pieces of the soundbar that would contact the new top. Use a body saw or a cutoff wheel and just make the cuts. When you're making your cuts, just be cautious not to cut through the wiring harness. It's wrapped in foam. Now the connector in the light bar is kind of a problem child. Drill out the rivets and pull the connector and its housing out of the light bar. The easiest way to remove the connector housing is to just break it and cut it free from the connector. With the connector free, pull the harness from the light bar and lay it in the remaining section that we just modified. Take a second and clean up all the cuts. Take out the tape again and neatly cover the opening. Now the only reason we're doing this is to keep the harness from bouncing out of the soundbar. The cut will be up against the top and completely hidden. Install the highly modified light bar with the original hardware. The speaker harness should be tucked up out of the way and ready for future use. Use wire loom or some tape and create a harness. Reconnect the original connector and conceal the wiring under the roll bar padding. Let's move back down to the bed and clean the surface along the bolt holes just below the window. We're going to run some weather stripping just below the edge. We actually want to cover those mounting holes. Pull off the factory installed weather strip protection and then install the top from the rear. Start a sport bar bolt to help with proper alignment of the top. Also start the top bolts that are usually located under the freedom tops. Now when installing the bolts, start with the center bolt, then just move to any bolt that can be easily installed. Order really isn't important. Tighten is required to help with bolt alignment, but do not final tighten. It will be necessary to use vice grips or even a C-clamp to squeeze the hardtop and the truck bed together to aid in bolt installation. When all the bolts are started and in place, tighten them each up a little at a time just to pull the two sections together without damage. Go ahead and final tighten all 7 bolts as well as those upper hardtop bolts. There are 4 round rubber gaskets that will need to be used between the sport bar mounting surface and the top. With the 1/2-inch bolt in the sport bar, push the washer over the bolt. This will hold the bolt in place as well as the rubber washer. Use Loctite. Start the bolt at the cab, then move to the rear and start that bolt as well. With both bolts in place, tighten the front bolt, then the rear. Use a 25 Torx and remove the factory hardtop windshield latch brackets and replace them with the provided brackets. Install the gasket between the cab and the removable top. Clean the surface prior to install. Run the gasket as close to the roof line or top of the gasket mounting surface as possible. Just make sure that you have full adhesive contact. When installing the removable top, you will need to tuck the thick rubber gaskets at the corners of the windshield into the top to allow it to seat and seal. It's tight, but tight doesn't leak. Move to the interior and adjust the latches to pull the top into place. Now don't get carried away with the latch tightening. They should be firm to latch down, but not so tight that they rip themselves out of the top. Adjust them a little at a time until you have a good seal. Move to the bed and apply a good coat of silicone around those bed bolts. You do not want it to leak here. Install the nuts and tighten. Reinstall the tailgate door latch hardware. It may require some minor adjustment for the latch. We'll make that adjustment once we reinstall that rubber gasket. The original tailgate gasket will be reused with some modifications. Follow the contour of the bed and trim off the excess upper corner molding from the harness. Push the gasket into place and trim the corners as necessary. A little silicone will seal it up nicely. Close the tailgate and stand back. Take a look at your handiwork. You did that.